Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. This week we saw 20 Indian soldiers. They were killed in a standoff with China. And this has been going on the China-India border. And this is not the first time that there have been skirmishes between India and China. But in last 40, almost 45 years, this is the first time that there was violence and 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives in a standoff with the Chinese. The skirmishes have been going on, as I earlier said, but the main issue is that India has been showing aggression to its neighbors. This is the perception in the region. Let it be Pakistan, let it be China, Nepal for that matter, Bangladesh or Sri Lanka even. We see that India has been showing a consistent aggressiveness to its neighbors. Now, what is basically the reason for this aggressiveness? Is India trying to be a bully in the region? Is India trying to show itself that it cannot be challenged in the region? This recent rift between China and India speaks volumes about what India is up to. The Indian leadership at the moment, it seems like that they have now opened another front for India with its Chinese neighbors. We know that India contests its elections on anti-Pakistan sentiment, and for that we see that line of control has been aggressive mostly, and India has been showing aggression on the line of control. But when it comes to line of actual control with the Chinese, this time we have seen that Indians have shown aggression, which Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi also said that India actually provoked its neighbors China for this kind of standoff, for this aggression. Chinese maintain the same. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, he also said that this escalation and this violence was provoked by India. Now, this is the general perception about India in the region. Today, we are going to talk about the regional stability, strategic stability in the region, and what countries in the region they think about India, Indian designs in the region, Indian aggressiveness in the region. Social media, of course, says also a lot of things about the ongoing situation. And we are just going to see on our screen about the situation that was shown on the social media, the way people were commenting on the social media. I would like the producers to show the tweets that were mentioned on the social media. So that we can see that these tweets were primarily criticizing the Indian government. Nidhi Razdan, prominent journalist from India, she said that the government said Indian soldiers were not missing in action. Now it emerges that 10 soldiers, including 2 majors and lieutenant colonel, were being held by China and released yesterday. Story broken by the Hindu. Now the Indian Express is reporting the same. Now the thing is that there was secrecy around this development. Indian government was not being truthful to its own people because they have obviously they have things to hide. We are going to continue to show you the different tweets that were mentioned on the social media, how people are discussing the situation. We are joined by Mr. Ikram Sehgal, renowned senior expert on security and strategic stability in the region on South Asia, on Skype. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome.
Mr. Sehgal, welcome to the show. As we are talking about China and India standoff, what do you think about this aggression that India has been showing to its neighbors, and this time to China, as the Chinese Foreign Minister said, and also Pakistani Foreign Minister Mr. Shah Mahmood Qureshi said the same, that India has been showing this consistent aggression to its neighbors. How do you see this?
Well, this is a fact of life because, you know, they have been bullying all their neighbors one by one. And if you look at it, they started with breaking up Pakistan in 1971. Then always they had Nepal almost as an annexee. Bhutan and Sikkim they had under their thumb. Maldives, they actually sent in paratroops to reverse a coup. In Sri Lanka, they initially sent in, if you remember, the IPKF, Indian Peacekeeping Force, which had to come away when they had a lot of losses, right? And even then they maneuvered the upset election victory of the previous president, who has now come back to power as prime minister, and his brother is now the president. So, and even in Bangladesh, which is supposed to be a great ally of theirs, after the announcement that 1.8 million Bangladeshis in Assam were aliens, and they will have to go back to Bangladesh. They do not have a very good relationship with Bangladesh, even though it's not openly said. So basically, they're actually, if you look at it, left with the Maldives and Bhutan. And even Bhutan, to an extent, is turning toward China way. And if you have recently followed the news, the Nepal Parliament passed a map in which they declared some territory which India claims to be its own as a Nepalese territory. So I think basically India has followed a relationship hegemony, trying to impose its will on its neighbors in South Asia. And because of that, there is no goodwill towards India by any country. Even the goodwill that they've supposedly fostered with Afghanistan is confined to the government in Afghanistan, in Kabul, really, and up to here adherence. Otherwise, if you look at it, they do not have any say whatsoever in Afghanistan, and that has been Pakistan's stance, for a long time, and has been proven correct when the United States engaged with the Taliban and did not ask India to do that. And before that, Russia had done the same thing. So, basically, if you look at it, India has been trying to flex its muscles, has really, put in a lot of money into its armed forces. And, and unfortunately for India, they have a very good movie industry in Bollywood. And the last, if you look at it, more than 100 movies have been produced in Hindi and in other languages, regional languages, showing the great prowess of the Indian armed forces as to they were supermen, they could do anything, etc. And, naturally a hype was built up.
So the ground reality is different from the movies, of course.
Obviously, you cannot have Major General Shah Rukh Khan or Major General Akshay Kumar leading a Bollywood first armored division to fight in Ladakh. The reality is different, when you go on the ground and fight things. So the
Mr.
point
Sehgal,
is
please stay with us. Stay with us on Skype. We are joined by renowned senior ambassador, Ambassador Zamir Akram, expert on Pakistan's foreign policy and regional affairs. Assalamu alaikum.
Ji, walaikum salam.
Ambassador Akram, welcome to the show. Talking about this standoff between China and India, many experts in India are of the view that India should refrain from joining the anti-China camp led by the United States. Do you agree with this whole concept that India is showing aggression because of because they have joined the US camp, or do you think that this is just another way of the BJP government to show that they are tough? They are tough with China, they are tough with Pakistan, and they are tough with everybody, all their neighbors.
It's both these reasons. Obviously, the BJP government has an ambitious hegemonic agenda, and it is implementing that agenda, as we have seen with Pakistan, with China, and the southern neighbors, even with a small country like Nepal. So, yes, there is this element of the pursuit of Indian hegemony, which the present government in India is aggressively pursuing. This hegemonic ambitions, these ambitions have been sustained and helped and promoted by their alliance with the United States as part of this quadrilateral alliance to contain China. And that has encouraged the Indians to pursue such an aggressive line even against China, a country which is much more powerful than they are. So it is both these factors that are in play at this time. And this is going to cause unnecessary instability in the region. And eventually it is going to be detrimental to the Indians themselves. Because if there is a clash or a wider conflict between China and India, I'm not too sure that the Americans are going to come in directly. They may support them with military equipment, etc. But the Americans are not going to step in on behalf of India to protect it against China.
Right. Please stay with us on phone call, Ambassador Akram. Mr. Sehgal, this point is very important that after the abrogation of 370, last year, August, India started the illegal construction of roads and other structures in Ladakh. Now, we know that Ladakh is a disputed land between China and India. So, the message from the Indian side was that, from the Chinese side was that India cannot continue with doing whatever they want to do. They can abrogate 370 and they can start with the construction of roads and structures over there. This was a very clear message from the Chinese side that if they would go, India would go further, if they cross the red line, there would be aggression from the Chinese side. Now, the thing is that, do you think that China would want India to reverse the decision on 370? Or let's say China would want India to take back its 370 decision?
I think, well, that of course is always on the card that India will reverse its 370 decision, because if you look at it really, it became a trilateral dispute in the sense of there's a dispute between Pakistan and India over Kashmir. There's a dispute between Ladakh and between India and China over Ladakh, right? And of course, India also claims Aksai Chin, which was never their territory anyway. But this dispute goes historically. If you look at it, this was done forced onto the Tibetan rulers at that time, who were under the thing by the British, and the Chinese have never accepted any agreement that the Tibetans came. And if you look at it, all the logistics, if you look at the roads, etc., everything from the Chinese side, they're easy into Ladakh, whereas from the Indian side, it is very difficult to approach Ladakh. They've only one rail road in which it goes very close to Kargil, and from there they go there. So the point is that it is now a trilateral dispute, and I think it's a moot point about Article 370. We've gone past Article 370. India has taken an action which I don't think it's in a position to reverse, because the Indian public will murder Modi. So the point is that now that the dispute has occurred, and now that China has decided that it's disputed territory, and India has done the first action, I think it's become irreversible. And if you look at it, Ladakh was always Chinese. It was never really a part of Pakistan or Ladakh Kashmir anyway. It may have been at that point of time because of the British Raj, they made the Tibetans sign that agreement. So I think if you look at it, India crossed a fail-safe line when they invoked Article 370. And, it's all very well to sort of, browbeat Pakistan, India being a very dominant military power conventionally. But, at the same time, to take on the Chinese, which they have been, the Indian government has hyped the public, like Zamir Bhai has said. And by the way, I don't think there's somebody better than Ambassador Zamir Akram to comment on this, because he was an ambassador in Nepal. In fact, I visited him in Nepal maybe 2 decades ago. And at that point of time, even the Nepalese were seething at that time. They were frustrated by the Indian attitude at that time. So I think if you look at it, the thing, etc., from a long-term point of view, I think we've crossed that line. We've crossed that line. And that line, and then you mentioned about lies, telling lies. If you see when they said about the casualties, first they said 3, then 23, and then now another, so many people have been given back as prisoners. Incidentally, if it was such an equal fight, where are the Chinese prisoners that the Indians should have held? If it was such an equal fight, the Chinese could take prisoners of the Indians, but if the Indians supposedly inflicted so many casualties, but they didn't take a single Chinese prisoner. So I think, we know exactly what happened, because militarily, if you look at the casualties, immediately, who has got the upper hand, right? And you look at the people in the casualty list. Among the dead, 1 full colonel. Among the prisoners, 1 lieutenant colonel and 2 majors.
Yes.
So I think we are very clear that Indians have taken on more than they can chew, right?
Right.
Now, there has been a talk about, United States airlifted in equipment.
Right, Mr. Sehgal, I'll come back to you. This Nepal point that you mentioned earlier is very important. I'll put this question to Mr. Zamir Akram, Ambassador Zamir Akram. Ambassador Akram, Nepal recently approved the map interestingly, those areas also which are claimed by India. Now, what we see is that even other countries in the region, other than China and Pakistan, they're concerned about their areas and this Indian aggression. So, what is the message to India by the regional countries and countries like Nepal and maybe in future from Bangladesh and Sri Lanka for that matter?
The reality is that India has disputes with all its neighbors. It's not just Pakistan. It has disputes, as we are seeing it being played out against China, against Nepal. It occupied Sikkim. It has been interfering and virtually treating Bhutan as a colony. It has created difficulties with Sri Lanka, and now there are problems even with Bangladesh, the country that they themselves created out of East Pakistan. So the Indians, in a sense, when they have been trying to argue that Pakistan is isolated, actually it is India which is isolated in the region. And this isolation has become all the more clear now with the Indians not even being able to, not being involved even in Afghanistan, a country or a government at least in Afghanistan, where they have tried to play a role and eventually their own friends and allies, the Americans, basically kept them out of any kind of a solution in Afghanistan. So the isolation that India is now experiencing is a result of this hegemonic policy. I mean, countries may accept India as a big power, as a big neighbor and all that, but at the end of the day, no country is willing to surrender its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the Nepalese case is a very clear example of that. In the Nepalese case, of course, the Indians have occupied this territory over 400 square kilometers in the Kalapani area after their war with China in 1962, because that area is on the tri-junction between Nepal, India, and China. And they have never returned that territory, and now that the popular elected government of Nepal has clearly stated through action through their parliament that this is a territory that belongs clearly to Nepal. It shows that even with a small country like Nepal, there is a point beyond which it will not be pushed. And to Nepal's advantage is the fact that they are no longer as dependent on India as they were in the past, because they now have China on their northern borders, and China has built roads and infrastructure to trade and to engage in cooperation with the Nepalese. So the Nepalese are no longer, in a sense, dependent on India as they were in the past. So this is something that is a new reality, a new geopolitical reality that India needs to recognize that their hegemony is not acceptable to any country on its borders.
Right. Gentlemen, please stay with us on phone call and on Skype. We're going to take a break, and after the break, we're going to discuss about the regional situation, the regional security situation, while Pakistan and China have embarked on a mega economic activity, which is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This is going to benefit not just China and Pakistan, but the region. So both have a plan for the region, and the plan is development and connectivity. But on the other side, we see that India is picking up fights with almost all its neighbors. Let it be Pakistan on the line of control, let it be line of actual control with China, as we were discussing earlier, or let it be with Nepal, Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka. The thing is that the question is that has India learned the lesson after the killing of 20 of its soldiers, or India would still go for anti-Pakistan sentiments and open some kind of aggression with Pakistan, as Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi just recently mentioned that if there is some escalation from the Indian side, Pakistan would give a befitting response. There were some very important meetings recently at the top level, Pakistani leadership, military and the government leadership. We're going to discuss about that as well after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing the standoff between China and India and repercussions for the region. The point is that India has been showing aggression to almost all its neighbors, let it be specifically Pakistan on the line of control or line of actual control with China. Also keeping in mind that Chinese and the Pakistanis maintain that India has been involved in illegal construction of roads and structures on the line of actual control. Now, this is the issue with the Indians, that they have been showing aggression and at the same time going on for illegal construction. We are joined by Michael Kugelman, renowned expert on South Asian affairs. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you. Good to be back with you.
Michael, talking about this trade that you talked about, this cooperation between India and China, the trade between China and India has been doing well, interestingly in 2018 and 2019. So do you think India cannot afford, specifically India, cannot afford to have another, sort of incident with China on the India-China border?
Well, look, I mean, I think there are two different issues. Certainly, there is a fair amount of interdependence, economic interdependence, but it tends to be one way. I mean, India is the smaller economy of the two. China has made some major contributions to key economic sectors in India that have really been struggling of late, such as the manufacturing sector. Slowdowns in many years, and it's been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So there is a fair question to ask. It's maybe an unpopular question to ask now, given all this nationalistic sentiment in India. But can India afford at this juncture, when it's experiencing considerable economic problems, can it afford to reduce or cut commercial ties with what is a key economic partner for India? But that said, it's a separate issue as to future clashes on the border. Certainly, I think what happened earlier this week with all of the fatalities, that was an inherently escalatory act. So I think even though India and China are in dialogue now, even though this crisis will likely come to an end eventually, the India-China relationship is more tense now than it has been for quite a few years. And I think that suggests that we are going to see future clashes, including potentially more violent clashes. Maybe not next month or so, but certainly in the coming times.
Right. Michael, please stay with us. Ambassador Akram, talking about this whole situation, Pakistan and India both are also members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, SCO has a plan, has a mandate for the region. It is a regional cooperation platform which focuses on security as well as on trade and mutual cooperation. Being a part of SCO, do you think that such platforms can also in future prove to strengthen the relationship between India and its neighbors? And do you think that India would also keep in mind that such platforms are important for India? India cannot isolate itself in the region.
I'd like to go back a bit and look at this relationship in geopolitical terms rather than in just economic terms. Yes, of course, the India-China trade relationship is very strong, and mainly because of Chinese exports, because China is a stronger economy, and it is also one of India's largest trading partners. That said, the fact remains that if you look at it from the Indian perspective, the Indians see themselves as a global power or want to be a global power, and they certainly want to establish their hegemony over the neighborhood. Now, this ambition, this strategic ambition, is something that only the United States is willing to accept and endorse, and in fact has actually supported it, whereas the Chinese are not prepared to accept Indian regional hegemony. They don't consider India as an equal power, and they see themselves as the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, which is a different level from their perspective. So that's the fundamental difference between India and China and India and the United States. And in this triangular relationship, of course, the Indians will always look towards the United States for helping it achieve its ambitions in the region and in the world.
Right.
That said, I want to now talk about what you referred to as the SCO.
Right.
The SCO is a very useful platform, but unfortunately, the SCO has not been enabled to play a more proactive role in addressing the the problems within the SCO region. Apart from China, the other major player is, of course, Russia, and it is important to see that in this particular time, the Russians have not come out fully in support of the Indians in their confrontation with the Chinese. That's because the Russians place a higher degree of importance to their relationship with China as compared to their relationship with India, which I do not mean to say that they are not important, but they are certainly not as important as Russian relations with the Chinese. The fact is that SCO has not been enabled. It can only play a positive, constructive role if the players, if the participating countries allow it to do so. And that would apply both to India, Pakistan, as well as to India, China. So at the moment, the SCO platform is an available platform if the Indians want to use it, but I don't think that they are ready to use it to address their differences with either India or Pakistan. No, either China or Pakistan.
Right, right. Ambassador Akram, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Mr. Sehgal, how do you see the future of China and India now? Do you think that India has learned the lesson, and or I would say that both countries, China and India, have learned the lesson that aggression is not the solution, and this is probably not the first time that there have been skirmishes between India and China at LAC, but this time, this incident, these skirmishes were, I would say, the deadliest, as Michael just also mentioned earlier. What is the future of China and India relations?
First of all, it seems like deja vu, 1962. Except the difference between 1962 and now, 2020, is that the print media was in existence in 62, and the electronic media did not play a role, and the social media did not play a role. The Indian media hype at that time pushed the Indian government, which was not a very aggressive government as compared to the BJP at the moment. BJP has been flexing its muscles all over with its neighbors. So I think if you look at it, Article 370, the revocation of Article 370, has a Rubicon has been crossed. A fail-safe line has been crossed. And that, I don't think that is reversible, whatever you may say. Ladakh was disputed territory, like Kashmir is disputed territory.
Right.
And if there is disputed territory, somebody takes unilaterally action to absorb that within the Indian Union, then India has crossed a Rubicon. And I, for one, do not feel that in the present context, whereas the world is going through a number of seismic geopolitical changes, with the Americans now, decidedly trying to pull out of Afghanistan, I think, and having already pulled out mostly from Iraq, etc. And even if you look at it, their presence in Saudi Arabia, etc. So I think there's been a absolute thinking where at the moment I think we are headed towards some sort of catastrophe, military catastrophe here happening in this region, unless cooler heads prevail and India takes such steps as to step back from the brink. Because
Right.
Article 370, actually triggered that dispute. And with the result that India now today is boxed in a no-win position between its
Right.
own public and the hype that it has created, and the fact that all the land routes to Ladakh. Actually, I'm sorry to mention this, but 50 years ago, I was a helicopter pilot flying in this area, attached to the People's Liberation Army when they were making the Karakoram Highway. China, at that time, China did not have helicopters. So the point is, this area is really this thing. It is more accessible from the Pakistani side. It is more accessible from the Chinese side. Rather, Kashmir is more accessible from the Pakistan side. Ladakh, Aksai Chin, etc., is more accessible from the Chinese side. On the Indian side, there is one major road, the Leh, which goes through this thing, which is very difficult, and it's basically a single road, and that is why India really went all out during the Kargil campaign, because they felt that if Pakistan interdicts that road, then the entire Ladakh region would be cut off. So,
Mr.
I
Sehgal,
think my own feeling is,
sorry to interrupt you. I'll get back to you. I have two questions for Michael. Michael, my two questions. One is that do you think that India now or in future would continue with the construction in and around LAC? And the second thing is that do you think that India has now learned the lesson that aggression is no solution and they cannot go on with this whole thing? And do you think that India would reverse the Article 370 abrogation decision?
So first, I think I heard three questions. I'll respond to them all. The last one is simple. No, India. I really doubt India would ever go back on its decision. Article 370. That's been a part of the BJP's agenda for many years. It finally did it last year. It's not going to go back on that. I think that's a non-starter. On the issue of the infrastructure building, I think that certainly these negotiations between India and China, that'll be a big part. That'll be a big agenda point. China is going to be pushing India to reduce, if not stop, that road building. I think that China will be coming into these talks from a position of strength. But I think India will take a hard line on that. I mean, that road building is very important for India's interests. And, as you know, it's done a lot of road building in recent years, one in particular, a really large one, stretching all the way from Leh to the Karakoram Pass. That really puts India in a much stronger position to project power in Ladakh and to protect its territory that it claims to be its own. And it's not going to easily go back on that. So I think it's very unlikely. I don't know exactly what will happen in these talks, but I think it's very unlikely that Pakistan will stop building those roads. As for the issue of Indian aggression, I think we still don't know exactly what has been going on in Ladakh and the Galwan Valley and the surrounding area over the last few months. I think there's good reason to believe that China had provoked a lot of the current tensions by making several incursions into areas that India believes to be its own. So, talking about Indian aggression in the Ladakh region, I don't know if I would want to put it that way. I think the bigger question is, would India be willing to make concessions, to take a middle ground in negotiations with its much more powerful rival that will be in these talks from a position of strength? And as I said before, there's a lot of public pressure, a lot of popular sentiment in India that's taking a hard line on China. And I think that the Modi government will be under a lot of pressure not to back down so quickly, even though it has constraints and it has limited retaliatory options other than those that would be economic in nature.
Right. Mr. Sehgal, my last question. Recently, there were high-level official meetings in Pakistan. Pakistani leadership met at the Foreign Office, at the ISI headquarters, and today Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi also voiced his concern that if India shows some kind of aggression, Pakistan would give a befitting response to that Indian aggression. These recent top-level meetings, how do you see them in the regional context and in the context of this standoff between China and India?
I'm to pick up on Michael said. Michael said about India not stepping back in care. The thing is that is what Pakistan fears. Pakistan fears that in order to divert attention and make something for the Indian public, India will go to exploit having a false flag operation against Pakistan, embroil Pakistan in a way that will satisfy the Indian public, etc. And that is why Pakistan obviously has seen enough movement on the Indian borders and enough, let us say, alarming sort of troop maneuvers, which gives it thought. And that is why it was important for them to take both the civil and military leadership into confidence, exactly because obviously when you have sources of information and you do not really want to disclose it to the general public. But my feeling is that there is real apprehension that India, in order to divert its public opinion and particularly because it's boxed into a no-win position, we'll have that. I do not agree with Michael at all about India's military powers. Let me be very clear about it. 4/5 of the Indian armed forces are arrayed against Pakistan. They have not added to the 4 mountain divisions that were equipped in 1962 by the United States. They have not added to it at all. They did supplement some forces during the Kargil campaign, but that was also diverted to mostly occupied Kashmir. And in fact, they raised another Southwestern Command for the Air Force, and they raised another Southwestern Command for the Navy. So I think, let us put it very bluntly, whatever armaments, whatever hardware they have, mostly it is arrayed against Pakistan and they cannot cope with whatever China can put against them. Right? But I do hope that better sense will prevail. I do hope that they realize something. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but I have to say it very bluntly that it is expected that to divert their own public opinion, which is now baying for blood, for Chinese blood.
Right.
And if you look at their military commanders, they're all going as a former retired servicemen. They're all asking for Chinese blood. They say, okay, fine, let's give Pakistan, do something with Pakistan so that we can satisfy the Indian public. That is a great fear on my part and apprehension, which I hope 2 years ago, Michael hosted a reception for me, a meeting for me in Washington.
Right. Mr. Sehgal, thank you for joining us. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Michael Kugelman, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. That's all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda.